Shwmae a chroeso I Sgwrs, podlediad Consortiwm Canolbarth y De. Yn y podlediad hwn byddwch chi'n clywed y trafodaethau diweddara am bob math o bethau addysg. Hello and welcome to Sgwrs, the Central South Consortium podcast. In this podcast we'll bring you the very latest discussions on all things education.
Hello and welcome to Sgwrs, the podcast series from Central South Consortium. My name is Catherine Billington-Richards and I'm the Strategic Lead for Languages, Literacy and Communication. In this podcast, I'm joined by two English teachers from a large secondary school in the Vale of Glamorgan, Andy Lilford and Rachel Hassan. In this episode, we're going to discuss what taking research into the classroom can look like for English teachers and what the benefits and the impact can be. So firstly, I'd just like to welcome you, Rachel and Andy. Thanks for giving your time today. We really appreciate it. So an open question, first of all, can you tell us what inspired you to start looking at and working with educational research?
Yeah, I think things started very much with the launch of Curriculum for Wales and discussion around what a suitable curriculum would look like. And in fact, sort of from quite early on, we tried to get involved with a lot of the discussions that were taking place. So, for example, there's a really eye-opening event that was organised at Cardiff High. I think James Wise was sort of the main organiser, and some of the talks there, some of the discussions, particularly one by Damien Benny from Penaril, was talking about aspects like the forgetting curve and delayed retrieval practice and building schema. And when we were there, I think it's fair to say, Rach, isn't it, that our ears kind of really pricked up and we were thinking about what that might look like in our context.
Great. And was there anything else? Where did you go to find that sort of educational research? Did you go anywhere in particular, or?
I think a lot of where I started looking was just kind of connecting with people on Twitter, and I also from following the Team English Twitter account, I went to the Team English National Conference a couple of years ago. Right. And that was a really interesting event in Salisbury, and as part of that event, there was a speaker called Matt Pinkett. I'm not sure what school he was from. But he was doing a talk on rhetoric, and that really interested me at the time. And then when I went back to talk to Andy about it, it was something that we really wanted to try to use in our school. Firstly, with Year 11, we introduced it with Year 11, and we were starting to think about how that would work there. But that Team English National Conference, I think was a really interesting way of kind of getting involved with that research then at the start.
Like a catalyst almost, really. Yeah. I think Matt Pinkett's, he's the teacher who's written Boys Don't Try, isn't he? The book about boys in English, which is really interesting. Andy, what about yourself? I know that, I know you were specifically looking at research for children that perhaps don't have literacy-rich backgrounds. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, my context, I suppose, is I've been head of English for a while, and I think, we wanted to move on from sort of accepting that a certain percentage of our students might struggle, and thinking about what we could do to close the gap, whatever that really means. So it did encourage us to look further afield and look at where the best practice was happening there. So investigating schools, some in England, for example, the Greenshaw Trust and the Torquay Academy, but also further afield. And very, very quickly we got kind of hooked into the Uncommon Schools Network and some of the work that Doug Lemov has been doing. So that kind of shaped a lot of our next developments. And I was very fortunate to go on the Reading Reconsidered training that took place in London a year ago December. Yeah,
pre-pandemic, wasn't it, when the world was a normal place, I guess. I was there with Andy as well, which it was a great couple of days, Andy, wasn't it?
Yeah, fantastic.
I'm really interested, Rachel, about your rhetoric unit. I was just wondering if you could talk me through what made you, pick up this rhetoric unit, and perhaps explain what some of the benefits have been for the pupils in your classes.
Yeah, I think what really kind of stood out from that talk at the Team English National Conference, and then when I started to read a little bit more about it, was how we could use it to kind of move beyond. His talk was about moving beyond daft forest, so that idea of moving beyond kind of using a sort of checklist of sort of persuasive techniques in their writing and in their speaking. And we started to focus on, as I said, with year 11, we started to focus on ethos and pathos and logos, and introducing more kind of sophisticated ways of speaking and writing persuasively. And I think a real benefit of that was, being able to move beyond that sort of checklist approach, that sort of tick box approach, and starting to think really about what could make their persuasive writing and persuasive speaking so powerful. I think in pupils' own writing, they're able to kind of identify the
sorts of techniques used.
They're to identify the kind of techniques that are used in what other people have written and in other speeches, and then to use that in their own writing and their own speaking as well.
Andy, I can see you want to jump in there.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to say as well that, what Rachel brought in there was high challenge texts. Alongside that, we naturally were encouraging students to look at, some of the best things that have been thought and said, and really that was quite an important direction for us to take, I think, building that kind of cultural capital and not shying away from texts across different eras, that have really stood the test of time. So
the aspirational movement, really. Then, how did the pupils respond to those texts in your classes? Because I know that you've done sort of Cicero and lots of Shakespeare and Martin Luther King, and what's the pupils' reactions been to those texts?
Really, really positive. I mean, it developed into a year 9 rhetoric scheme of work, and I think year 9 really kind of they really jumped on the idea of looking at all of those really rich texts and being kind of really inspired by like Andy said, that kind of whole range of different speeches. Looked at historic speeches and political speeches, and they just really like that kind of variety.
That's great. Andy, I can see you want to jump in.
Yeah, I was just going to say as well that it was lovely to hear students feeling a real pride in the technical terminology. So, being able to talk about anadiplosis and use of antithesis, and it really linked into some of the work we've done more recently with vocabulary, where perhaps stereotyping slightly, but I think it is true to say that, in particular, a lot of the boys really kind of appreciate sounding smart and having technical names for things which feel kind of like quite rarefied, knowledge that for them makes them sound smart and not everybody might know. I think
it's that concrete as well, isn't it? It's not just the abstract concepts. It's looking at the concrete, but also I'm really interested in what you're saying about there. I think if I'm reading it right, that you're sort of saying it boosted their self-esteem and their confidence.
Yeah, I think so.
That's really, really interesting. So taking this further now and sort of just looking at English and literacy, I wonder if there's any other research that has really influenced your practice, perhaps at Key Stage 3 or Key Stage 4.
Yeah, I mean, I think at Key Stage 3, one of the key ideas that shaped our thinking was a couple of points from Mary Myatt and some sessions that we've either attended or we've listened to together. So one of the key things was the idea of texts above students' pay grades, so challenging texts and really embracing the challenge. And that informed a lot of our rethinking of Key Stage 3. So, for example, we've just finished To Kill a Mockingbird with year 9, and I've done that with relatively low attaining and and a group with quite complex needs, but they have absolutely loved it. And again, I think there's something there about self-esteem. So yeah, challenging text, and also Mary Myatt talks about the curse of content coverage.
Yeah.
And we've sort of scaled back the coverage and tried to go for a sort of deeper dive on text. So I think a good example at the moment would be something like noughts and crosses that we've done, which, it's taken us ages, I'll be honest, with lockdown and not kind of being able to set reading as a sort of regular homework, but actually the richness and the engagement that has come from pairing a text like noughts and crosses with non-fiction texts that relate to things like the Windrush Scamp or Stephen Lawrence. It's been really exciting hearing students in the corridor say things like, "Oh, I get what the whole Black Lives Matter is about now," or I was talking to my mum and dad the other day about the Stephen Lawrence case, and they were explaining it to me, and there was a real sort of buzz of energy when we embarked on study of noughts and crosses.
That's really, really interesting. I know as well, Andy, that you've done a little bit of sort of dipping your toe in the water with the University of Sussex fast-paced read alouds research. I just wonder if you can talk us through that a little bit, perhaps explain what the premise is. And I know that your trial was somewhat stopped by school closures, but I just wonder if you can give us a little overview of what you were doing with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, I was very aware that, fluency and fluent decoding is such a huge barrier for so many students, and in fact it was through a conversation with a colleague at another school, at Cowbridge School, and they mentioned, "Oh, have you heard about this piece of research?" And teaching a Key Stage 3 group, at that point a Year 8 group, I really wanted to try it with them, so we picked a couple of what for them were quite challenging texts that we had a few copies of, and we just went for it with a sort of fairly low risk strategy. I mean, these are students who were in Year 8, but their decoding through 8 years of school was not where it needed to be, and it was a barrier to their learning across the curriculum. So we blitzed the first text.
Can I ask what text it was, Andy?
Yeah, we used Private Peaceful.
Yeah.
And one of the techniques that we used was a lot of kind of pairing of images with it. So either I would give them images that connected to the text, or they would do sketches or even doodle.
Yeah.
And mainly the idea was that you're feeding into their listening ability, which for them was certainly more advanced than their fluent decoding and reading of text.
It's really interesting.
I mean, as you say, it was cut short by lockdown, but certainly anecdotally and observing the class that I still teach, the confidence to read aloud, the confidence to read much longer bursts of text for some of our weaker readers in that year group has been pretty transformational in terms of what we've been able to do with them since. And you mentioned self-esteem earlier. I mean, there is nothing more rewarding than seeing a student who really was down on themselves. I've got 2 students in that class who came from very difficult backgrounds, and they are now reading whole pages of text out loud in an online environment, and it's incredibly rewarding. Yeah.
Takes a huge amount of confidence to do that, doesn't it? Especially in an online sort of, Zoom world.
Yeah. Really.
Okay, so thanks for sharing that. So sort of on a wider curriculum level, what are you doing with sort of taking some of these strategies and taking some of this research? How are you spreading it out sort of wider than just the English faculty?
I mean, one of the key pieces of reading was Catherine Mortimer's Disciplinary Literacy, and again that led us to look at the Writing Revolution as a really good kind of manual for building systems of writing around the curriculum. What I've really liked about that is you've got some kind of quick wins, and you've got some really accessible ways in for different teaching staff and people who might be a little bit wary of seeing themselves as a teacher of writing. So
yeah, I know you've also done something with the sort of Reading Reconsidered units as well, haven't you, and vocabulary across the school.
We have, yeah. Rach, do you want to talk a little bit about the Reading Reconsidered?
Yeah, I think the idea of our kind of sharing our kind of approaches to teaching vocabulary across the school was something that a lot of other subject teachers have really kind of engaged with in thinking about how that could work in their own subjects. We've looked at using vocabulary grids, and Andy's done some training with other staff on how they can be kind of incorporated into lessons, and I think that's really starting to pick up there, and I think being able to kind of bring in those that vocabulary and to really focus on explicit vocabulary teaching is something that really allows us to think about the high quality texts that we're using, and kind of using texts that are as Andy said, kind of slightly above their pay grade, and thinking about the level of challenge that we can kind of explore in those texts.
That's great. Sorry, Andy, go on.
I was just going to say, a couple of interesting things came out of it, because we provided a few different models for the explicit teaching of vocab. So we brought back the kind of what we've called the Lemov model, which was presented in that Reading Reconsidered training. And what's really nice about that is you've got images which accompany the vocab which you teach. So it's great for kind of retrieval practice, and it's great from that sort of dual coding aspect. But some of the kind of some of the less, I don't know what, other subjects like, for example, maths, technology, aspects of science preferred the Freya model, because they might be dealing with fewer pieces of vocab. But the understanding has to be really in depth.
So it's like a conceptual understanding, perhaps more in those subjects. Which, then the phrase. Perhaps it's worth just explaining what you're referring to is that Lemov model. So in part of Reading Reconsidered, Doug Lemov sort of says that as teachers, you're the ones who are the experts in the room. So you provide them with an expert definition of the word explicitly, don't you? So you would say, you would explain a word meaning to them explicitly, and then the pupils then go off and apply it, don't they, Andy, in a kind of a grid format. And as you say, it's illustrated with an image as well. It's actually referred to in our Words Matter e-learning resource as well. So people, if you want to read more about it, you can click there. So that's really interesting, though, what you're saying about some subjects finding the Freya model more useful, some subjects finding that sort of direct instruction, and how it links to sort of whether a word understanding is at a literal level or sort of more deeper conceptual level. That's really, really interesting. If I can move on to Key Stage 4, because I know as well that research has really influenced how you've structured your Key Stage 4. I wonder if you can just sort of talk us through what you've adopted there to make your, your teaching and learning practice sort of more research informed.
Yeah, I suppose there's a lot of debate, a lot of argument about, skills, knowledge, and the relationship between the two. Certainly for us. Knowledge of words, and knowledge of vocab, we were observing it was a big differentiator between those who were highly attaining and those who were really struggling in our subject. So we carried forward the explicit teaching of vocab into Key Stage 4, and with the language GCSE, we have sort of moved away from a kind of an explicit skills-based approach, I suppose, to trying to develop a sort of a foundation of knowledge. So a foundation in terms of a good range of vocabulary, and also just a good a good general knowledge of some of the key topics and kind of current affairs and current thinking around issues like technology, issues like social status and identity, because I think most English teachers can relate to that moment where you do a mock paper with Year 11, or you do the discussion with Year 11, and you come out thinking, well, they just don't know enough.
Yeah,
they're making kind of they're saying things that just aren't related to the real world. So we've organised our language course around those, and actually kind of bringing up a list of key terms that we expect students to know and to retain over the long term. And again, what's been brilliant is we were talking about burgeoning. So the term burgeoning was one that we were using in relation to cryogenics, and the fact that the interest in cryogenics is burgeoning. And we used a picture of some budding and linked it to the idea of
growth.
Growth, organic growth, and really interestingly, in the summary question, which related to something growing, we were seeing, you kind of CD borderline kids using the word burgeoning in their summary writing, which was just this kind of knock-on effect that none of us had anticipated.
Yeah.
It was a real kind of it was a real double hitter. It informed and enabled their reading, but then it also informed and enabled their writing. So
that's brilliant. And I know as well, you've quite consciously looked at kind of schema building as well. So I know in the past you've talked about the fact that you teach Greek myths in Year 7. You've got an eye on what's going on in Year 13 when you come to the Merchant's Tale. That would be fair to say as well, I think, wouldn't it? What about... Sorry, Andy, go on.
Sorry, yeah. No, that's absolutely true. I mean, so the way that we've organised ourselves is... So Rachel has a kind of overview in terms of literature. So, we do try and really push that aspect of making links between texts. So when we were thinking about Key Stage 3, we had in our minds a bit of a 7-year plan, to be honest. So, we thought, let's aim really high. Let's aim for Year 13. Let's prep for that. And if we don't get them there, if we don't get all our students, all 240 of them into an A-level lit class, at the very least, we're going to be preparing them for beyond GCSE.
Yeah.
If we don't get there, they're still going to be doing pretty well at GCSE. That was our thinking. Yeah.
And I know as well, you use knowledge organisers quite a lot at Key Stage 4, don't you? I just wonder if you can talk us through how you use them.
We've actually used them throughout Key Stage 3, Key Stage 4, and in some ways with Key Stage 5 as well. And I think the knowledge organisers have been really useful for that kind of for establishing, first of all, what we want them to know, and making that really kind of explicit to pupils, but also to parents as well. There's been a lot of engagement from parents in using the knowledge organisers, in asking for the knowledge organisers, in testing their kids on the knowledge organisers, and that allows us to build in things like more kind of low stakes quizzing and thinking about the vocabulary on the knowledge organisers, organising it but with a kind of timeline that is relevant to the topic that they're studying, and kind of going back to what Andy was saying about that sort of build up through from Year 7 right up to Year 13. I think having those knowledge organisers helps us to really think about that kind of holistic approach, and there'll be information on a knowledge organiser in Year 7 that that they might be able to kind of come back to much later on, and that will be relevant to them when they're studying at GCSE or even beyond, and it's kind of encouraging that retention of knowledge over a much longer period of time.
That's really interesting. I just noticed I was nodding, and of course this is a podcast, so you can't see me nodding, but I was nodding along with what Rachel was saying then. I know more recently that you've taken part in the Central South Comparative Judgment pilot, and that's led you to sort of look at the research around writing. I just wondered if you could tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the comparative judgment pilot, it kind of gave us that much sort of wider context for where pupils are with their writing at the moment. And it really emphasised the need for more kind of explicit teaching of writing, and really kind of breaking down writing to kind of almost accept, kind of going back to basics approach really, but thinking about, not running before we can walk, thinking about not doing those kind of extended pieces of writing before they've really mastered sentence level, and the quality of their kind of sentence level writing.
Yeah.
And it really fitted in with what Andy was saying about with Writing Revolution.
Andy, you want to?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was just going to say the timing of it was spectacularly good as well, because I think you do naturally, when we were planning our Key Stage 3, I think your natural first port of call is, what are our texts going to be? What's the spine of our curriculum going to be? So we'd had a lot of thought about that. Those text choices, a lot of them were informed by some other work from Lemov, this idea of kind of the plagues, the aspects of text that students find difficult, for example, archaic language.
Yeah.
But we became quite conscious that we'd focus so much on reading that writing, although we'd got a few things in the bank, slow writing approaches, sentence combining approaches, what we didn't have really was as a kind of systematic approach. And it really showed in the comparative judgment outcomes, where I think a couple of things really interested us. First of all, where students really knew what they wanted to do later in life, they could write extensively on a task that asked them about future careers. So again, it underpinned the fact that if you don't know stuff, you're going to find it difficult to write stuff. So that linked in with some of our thinking. But secondly, as Rachel said, I think sentence construction, it was no big surprise to us that sentence construction was a huge issue. And going back again to looking for good practice, looking for where attainment of, perhaps the weaker students or socially disadvantaged students was happening. Torquay Academy mentioned Writing Revolution. Greenshaw Trust mentioned Writing Revolution. So I kept seeing it. We kept seeing it all over the place, and there it was, alongside the no more marking comparative judgment follow-ups. So like our eyes just lit up, to be honest. It's like, we must be doing something right. We're going in the right direction. Yeah.
And it's really timely. The Aston report was published today on English and literacy skills of primary school pupils, and they talk there about writing being one of the the weakest of the attainment targets for speaking, listening, reading, or writing. And I think what this is telling us is that writing is one of the most cognitively demanding things we can ask a child to do. As you say, Andy, they're thinking about what to write, as well as that sentence construction. And I think what it's really exposing for us at the moment is that children perhaps don't have that secure understanding at the sentence level. Certainly when they're looking to add variety. I know, as English teachers, probably we've been guilty in the past of saying add variety of sentence structures to your writing, but what does that actually mean? It's the specificity of the feedback that we give, and then feeding that through into how and what we teach, and the sequences of what we're teaching with regards to writing. Rachel, I can see you want to jump in.
Yeah, I think it just really highlighted to us, and everything that you're saying there just kind of highlights again how we sort of assume that pupils come to us in year 7 with a proficiency in writing, and maybe we kind of don't break that back down enough, and really think about whether they have actually sort of mastered the sentence level stuff and got that proficiency in their sentence level work, or whether we're kind of rushing them into producing kind of longer pieces of work and not really allowing them the chance to kind of develop those more specific more, and sometimes that can be driven a little bit too much by kind of thinking thinking about how we need to kind of link it to stuff that they know and to the content that we're teaching them. We really need to be aware of that and not make those assumptions that, they already know how to do something when they come to us in lesson.
And it's also, we've talked a lot about sort of international and national research today, but this is also local research, isn't it? That you've done, the comparative judgment pilot is data that's local to your school. And that's really powerful, isn't it, to help you inform where you're going, certainly, in the current curriculum. And I'm probably looking forward for Curriculum for Wales as well. It's that kind of local school-based research that you've got that's driving your practice there as well. I guess as a final takeaway now for departments who are looking to become more research informed or research engaged, I would just wonder if you can offer any advice, and also what you think the benefits are to becoming more research engaged. Andy? I
think as a department and as individuals, we've definitely benefited a lot from Twitter and EduTwitter and the content that's out there and the advice that's out there has been fantastic. So, talking about Mary Myatt and people like Lemov. In fact, more recently, David Didow with his Making Meaning in English, which has just dovetailed beautifully with the trick that we mentioned earlier. There's some really, really high quality conversations going on about the use of research and research-informed practice. Yeah.
Rachel, what about yourself? Any advice for departments looking to get involved?
I think we started by Andy set up a sort of CPD board in our faculty office, and was really kind of encouraging everyone to get involved in thinking about that research and in kind of talking about it. And I think it's just kind of making time for those sort of conversations and taking interest in it, and that is what kind of sparked a lot of our discussions.
Can I ask how much time sort of in a department meeting you might talk about this kind of thing? Is it something you talk about in departmental meetings?
I think it's fair to say there are three of us that are trying to drive it at the moment in department meetings and on a sort of whole school basis. So I think that's the place to start, really. I mean, if you take it right back to the beginning, in terms of what we read first, it was a case of pushing Rosenshine under people's noses, and then a follow-up in a faculty meeting about, what have you read? What did that mean to you? How did that match what you're doing in the classroom? So it's been very much a sort of drip feed approach.
Yeah.
But I think what's great is when people can see that it informs their practice and it makes them better teachers, and it ups the level of conversation you're having in a faculty meeting, then it gets critical mass very, very quickly. I think people want to be part of that discussion. Yeah.
It's like change management, really, isn't it? What you're sort of doing there is identifying people sort of tipping the balance. Rachel, sorry, you were going to speak.
Yeah, I think that's. I was just going to say. I think that's really become evident with the writing revolution in particular. I think because it involves a lot of approaches that are quite easy to put into practice. There's been quite a lot of sort of buy-in, if you like, from other teachers, and I think that has made everyone kind of talk about it a lot more and take that interest in thinking about the research behind it as well.
That's really great. So I'd just like to conclude today by saying a huge thank you to Andy and Rachel from Sgwrs for giving their time so freely today and being so open and honest with the discussions. We really, really appreciate it. Thank you for listening. If you remember to subscribe to the channel for all our future podcast episodes, and you can also give us a follow on Twitter at CSC_literacy.
Diolch am wrando ar y bennod hon o Sgwrs. Cofiwch ein dilyn ar Twitter a Facebook, tanysgrifio ein sianel YouTube, ymuno yn cymunedau ar ein gwefan a darllen ein bwletin ysgolion wythnosol am y newyddion diweddaraf. Thanks for listening to this episode of Sgwrs. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter and Facebook, subscribe to our YouTube channel, join our online communities via our website, and read our weekly school bulletin for the latest news. Hwyl am y tro. Bye for now.